Hello and welcome. She's affectionately nicknamed the Iron Lady for her tough determination during the most challenging times. And it's a characteristic she's found much needed as she became the first woman elected to head an African nation. This week on One on One, meet the President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf. She has continuously picked up accolades in the Western media as one of the most influential women leaders in the world, and it soon becomes clear what has shaped her over the years. Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf spent her early days playing like a tomboy on the streets of her hometown, Liberia's capital, Monrovia. She handled consistent taunts about her fair skin, inherited from German blood on her mother's side. Her teenage years were no easier, with her father passing away, then straight into a difficult and abusive marriage, struggling to raise 4 children. But academic success soon had her climbing the rungs of the government ladder, where she put those tough childhood lessons and thick skin to good use, surviving the dirty and dangerous politics of her country and finally being elected in a wave of hope to lead it. Well, Madam President, I'm very honored to have some time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, your nickname is the Iron Lady, and you like it. Why is that?
Well, I do. I think it suggests that someone who believes in sternness, who believes in discipline, and it comes from my early years of professional life when I was very strict in fiscal discipline. I think actually the phrase was copied after Margaret Thatcher, but they felt that it suited me because of what I stood for in those early days of professional life.
Well, you certainly went through a lot more than Margaret Thatcher in your life story. We'll get onto that in a moment. But you were named by Forbes magazine as the 51st most powerful woman in the world in 2006. Time magazine had you as one of the top 10 female leaders. The Economist called you the best president the country's ever had. I mean, talk about pressure. I wonder if there's always that pressure to perform on you now with all these eyes looking at you.
No, absolutely. And like, sometimes it humbles me. Particularly, if I may add another one, the fact that I happen to be the first democratically elected woman president in Africa puts a lot of pressure on me because I'm under the microscope all the time to see what I do, what I say. I represent the expectations, aspirations of African women, maybe women elsewhere. And so that does put me under a lot of pressure, but I'm glad so far that we've tried to live up to the expectations and the challenges, and this is why we've been so recognized.
Now, in your autobiography, in the first line, you describe Liberia as a wonderful, beautiful, mixed-up country struggling mightily to find itself. Why do you think it's taken so long?
Because we still haven't come to grips with our past, a past that is a mix of being an indigenous African country, but being, quote unquote, founded by emancipated American slaves, and trying to deal with our national identity. What are we? Are we Americans? Are we Africans? And so it's that type of thing. I think we're finding ourselves now. I think we realize that we are indeed an African country, and most of our forefathers, the early ones, are of African origin. And so, but it's taken us a while, given the history and complexities of our country, to be able to confront it.
It's interesting, the title of your autobiography, This Child Will Be Great, comes from a prophecy of an elderly man who visited your village the day after you were born. I think he said it to your parents. Did your parents make a big fuss as you were growing up about that?
Well, in the beginning, it sort of struck home. We all, they remembered it, and they passed it on to me in the latter years. But I don't think anybody ever believed it. And given the kind of life that we had, the struggle that we had, we always then took it as a big joke. At each time, my mother would say, where's the greatness that this old man talked about? But still, it tells you that it was still in everybody's mind because we're pondering, what does that mean? Is that, it's one of those things that, but today, I use the title of the book because I just say, because I'm still pondering, was this just an old man just saying something, or is there something to predestination? Is there something to people who can actually prophesy and see the future? I don't know.
You were born in Monrovia, the capital of the country, and you were quite a feisty child. You were a tomboy playing out in the streets with the boys, playing football and doing sports. How did your parents handle that?
I think for a while they accepted it. You know, I was the third of 4 children. My sister before me was the gentle and the lady, so to speak. And I think in my case, they just accepted the fact that, oh, well, you know, she's that third boy we never had.
I was reading about your complex as a child about the fairer skin that you had. You used to go to bed praying that God would change your skin and make it darker somehow.
Yeah,
Why
because, you know, black was normal in our country, and anyone who was not was sort of a stranger in the midst, so to speak, and I got teased in school because of that. So my father was fully rural, you know, the son of a chief, of a rural chief, and my mother was also from a rural mother background, but from a German trader. And that's where the complexion comes in.
And the name Johnson, your father's name Johnson, came from when he moved from the village to Monrovia, and then because of his loyalty to his father's loyalty to the president, he changed it to Johnson for that.
That's correct. One of our former presidents who went into rural areas and actually worked with the chiefs and took their children, changed their names, because in those days to be able to quote-unquote pass, you know, you had to have one of the names that represented those who came from abroad, the so-called Americo-Liberians, and so his name was changed from Jamali to Johnson.
How did you relate to him? What sort of lessons in life did you learn from him?
Oh, in a way, he was a populist. He was a lawyer. Well, they used to call him the poor man's lawyer. Because he was always, you know, taking the cases for poor who could not afford the services. He was also a man of the town. And that gave my mother a lot of worries.
And her, your closeness to her, what did you get from her in terms of?
No, I think she was the strength of the family. She's the one she was very religious, or one who was very kind. But she taught us 3 basic things. Honesty, hard work, and humility. And I think that has stayed with me and my siblings throughout our life.
Your father passed away when you were a teenager. The family fortune really started to struggle after that, I gather. And then you married at 17 your childhood sweetheart, James, at the time. And before long, you were raising 4 boys. How did you cope at that young age with such responsibility?
Well, it was a tough one. But, you know, we have the extended family system in Liberia, so my mother, his mother helped out. That's how come we were able to leave the kids and go to school. In those early days before marriage, when my father was ill for so many years, for my mother to even take care of us took a lot of things, you know, like baking bread and selling it on the streets and doing everything he could really to survive and to keep the children in school. So those were really hard times.
There was even more for you, though, because you suffered abuse in the marriage and left in the end, and you were separated from your children for a while. How did you, again, like, finding strength to go through that in those kind of conditions, how did you cope?
I guess it's that inner strength that just keep ones, and the wanting to succeed, the wanting to just kept one focus. The help one got from family, from mothers, enabled us to do that. But they were tough times. But you know, that's our life. And, you know, in a way, that's all we had. If you wanted to make it in life, you had to undergo those kinds of difficulties. I mean, there were no options that you had.
I gather your first sort of professional job, so to speak, was as a bookkeeper and typist in a Lebanese garage.
That's correct.
Then you followed your husband, though, to the US and got a degree in accounting.
That's correct. He went to do his graduate work in agriculture, and I was able to get some support, some scholarship from the Liberian government to be able and go and join him to do my undergraduate work in accounting. But, you know, before that, I mean, we struggled. He worked, we were both living at one of the institutions out of town, a technical institution where he taught agriculture and ROTC, and I was taking care of children. I worked at this garage, but that's where I cut my professional teeth with an old French accountant whom I understudied and worked in this Lebanese garage. That enabled us to even, using their trucks in the night to build our first house, a house that is still there today. Our kids live there. So hard times, but normal times for us. I wish the kind of conditions in which we grew up, we could bring them back, because it developed character. It developed courage. It made us strong. Even the things I went through, with my husband, that people look at and say, oh, geez, what horror that she went through that. But it made me strong.
It's interesting because your academic work went very well, and you actually got a master's from Harvard's Kennedy Business School, School of Government. At that time, what did you envisage as your career? What did you think you would end up doing?
Well, in my early days, I thought I'd become an English teacher. I mean, like my mother, be a teacher. But as I moved along and got my first exposure to financial matters in that garage, and able then to go and do my first degree in accountancy, and then go on to Harvard and get a degree, I then figured I'll settle in for being one of those directors or assistant ministers, junior official, somewhere, crunching the numbers and pushing the papers and all of that. But that would earn me a livelihood. That would enable me to send my children to school. And it started that way. It progressed much faster and much further than that. But at the time, I didn't have an ambition or didn't think that I would be where I am today.
And we're going to go through that in just a moment, Madam President. Don't go away. More one-on-one with Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf coming up. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with Liberia's President, Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf. You actually got a fairly good start into politics, and you were actually, but it had its ups and downs. You were the Assistant Minister of Finance from 1972 to 73, but then walked out because of an agreement over public spending issues. Eventually, though, you became Minister of Finance in 1979. I wonder how you found that, the ups and downs of politics at that stage.
I adjusted to every phase of it. You may say my political life started when, having returned from Harvard and being a junior official, and made a speech at the commencement of my alma mater, challenged government's policy, a government of which I was a part. And all the old guards were there, and so after that, I began to have some political troubles, and I was being singled out as one of the troublemakers, but then one thing followed the other, and I was able to, just survive in every difficulty. Prepared me for another round, perhaps made me a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more courageous. And if I may describe what many people say, including my doctors, they say you're very stoic.
But of course, it was tough times in Liberia with the leadership. You had William Tubman and Charles Taylor, who both eventually had sort of very hard man, hard sort of dictatorial type of images into the outside world. You actually got on well with Charles Taylor at first, but then fell out with him. And you were imprisoned. You went through exile. So it was quite a tough time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And the really tough times and the times that I talked about in the book of going to prison, whatnot, had to do with the regime of Samuel Doe. The Taylor Rebellion was meant to challenge that particular regime, and there were many of us who had been affected, who had suffered under the regime, who felt that supporting someone who was challenging it and who might change it was the proper thing to do. At the time, we didn't realize what Mr. Taylor's own ambition and what his agenda was. And as soon as we found that out, many of our colleagues haven't suffered under it, then we began to challenge him, and we challenged him continuously and effectively until such time that true change came to Liberia.
And it was dirty business, and you were one of the few who survived being shot when a firing squad killed 13 Liberian cabinet ministers. Tell me about what happened there and how it changed, perhaps, or if it changed your perspective on politics there.
Well, I tell you, this was one of the saddest events in our country, and I think today we'll still feel the effects, of that. What that did for many of us who survived is to say that we were determined to make sure that they did not die in vain, that we were going to stay the course, we were going to work for the country, we were going to meet every challenge and every odd until such time that Liberia was put in a place where something like that would never happen again. Of course, our dreams took a long time to come because instead of things being progressively better, they got progressively worse as, we descended into war, a war that lasted 14 years and did a lot of, damage, a lot of death and destruction in our country. But again, I and a few others have just stayed steady, met every difficulty that came, suffered what it took, but at the same time, we've seen successes too. And today, I hope that Liberia is indeed now in a transformative mode.
What drew you to the United Nations? You left and joined the UN Development Programme for 5 years during 92 and 97.
I was actually recruited by the UN. They were looking for, at that time, looking for women, to good, competent, able women who could run the programs. And so I was then working with a private financial institution. And I was on their short list of being recruited because I had been in public service. I had been a Minister of Finance. I had been a staff member of the World Bank. So I had what they felt were the necessary qualifications. And so, the offer came and I went through the interviews process and I was chosen. And for me, it was just another platform,
But a change of pace.
Yeah.
Change of pace.
Yes, a change of pace, but an opportunity also because I would then get to meet African leaders. I would get more involved in African development issues, and that would broaden my perspective and prepare me more for the return home. There was always that long-term objective of returning home and being a part of the processes of change.
Now, of course, you became elected the first woman president of any African nation. And at the time you said, Africa is ready for a female president. Women all over are poised to enjoy this victory. Again, why do you think it took so long for the continent to put a woman at the head of a country, especially as African women are known for their strength?
Just because male domination has been a part of a global phenomenon. And even though we had exceptional women in our own nation's history, but when it came to the top leadership, like in the chieftaincy, it was always a man who was predominant. And I think women too, they either did not pursue those non-traditional roles that would equip them to compete in politics, and so women virtually stayed in the background. Women became, women took care of children, took care of the home, so it took us a while to get there. I'm just glad that I'm one of those that came out in the forefront. Now today, it's just mushrooming all over the continent. Women are running for high political office. Women are now in parliament, in assemblies.
And of course, the world rallied around you. You became very popular and a very strong figure and role model for people outside your country too. In fact, the US Congress put together a special session so they could have you address them as the first female leader of Africa, of an African nation. Now, I guess that was a defining moment for you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and it was a great opportunity to speak before the joint session and to talk something about my background and then to talk about the aspirations that I had and about what we'd like to see happen in our country. And I think that also turned a lot of things around for us. The support from the U.S. government after that just really took off and has remained strong ever since.
Of course, in your country, you saw how leaders should not behave, a personal experience of that. But I gather one of your personal heroes is the former Tanzanian leader, Julius Nyerere. Who else served as mentors for you?
Yes. The humility of Julius Nyerere and just the compassion of Nelson Mandela, the compromises, of someone who had gone through so much. These are people who we still try to emulate and whose lives just remain for us a beacon and something that we like to follow.
Let me ask you, considering all you've been through and what you've experienced, do you feel there has been a price to pay for the path you've chosen?
Oh, absolutely, there's been a price to pay. I sometimes feel very bad about the neglect I gave my sons. I should have spent much more time with them as a mother, particularly my youngest son, whom I left at 1 year old. He's a doctor today, practicing in Connecticut here in the United States. But you know, there were times when we're talking, he said, "Well, Mom, you weren't there." You know, those are the kinds of things that come back to haunt you. And of course, the positions I took, and that also, because I was always taking, you know, unpopular positions, you know, whether it was standing by this person or the other, that made me a lot of enemies too, who felt that I didn't stay with the same friends. I was ready to move and to challenge and to pursue other goals. So those are things that, you know, those are part of the consequences of being what you are and standing up for what you want.
Recognizing that deficiency and certainly the time with your family, and being blessed with such a big family now with grandchildren and so on, do you get downtime at all? Do you get any time to switch off?
A little bit now and then, maybe during the Christmas holiday, when I try to gather the grandchildren as much as I can, and then do things that I like to do. You know, I like to swim. I don't get much chance to do that now. But when I get them around and we sit around the pool, or we sit around I like jigsaw puzzles. I don't do that as much anymore. But you will find a table in my room with a puzzle always, you know, in progress, so to speak. If it means 10 minutes, just finding 1 or 2 pieces to slip in. Some downtime, but it's not as much as it should be.
And of course, you've made a mark in African politics, a clear mark, and raised a flag. How would you like to be remembered, though? What would you like your legacy to be?
I would like to say that I made a difference in the lives of the ordinary person in Liberia. Haven't reached there yet, but I'm on that road.
Madam President, I wish you luck. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.